Story Crossroads is pleased to introduce Richard Hatch, a story magician. He is accompanied by his wife, Rosemary Kimura Hatch, playing violin, and his son, Jonathan Hatch, playing piano.
We're excited to be here today, Lionheart Hall. I want to introduce my colleagues at the piano. It's our son, Jonathan. Over here to my right is my wife, Rosemary Kimura, and my name is Richard Hatch. They are musicians. I am a magician. And we're going to be performing 3 pieces as an ensemble today. We're going to begin with one called The Heart of Glass. Once upon a time there lived a miser who was so wealthy he could have bought half the world had he wanted to. But he did not want to, because being a miser, he loved nothing more than his money. He hated nothing more than to spend it. One Christmas Eve, as the miser sat counting his gold, he heard a knock at the door. When he opened the door, he saw a tiny old woman in tattered rags. "Please, sir," she said, "might I have just a crust of bread to eat and a moment to warm myself by your fire?" Well, the miser was so angered at having been interrupted while counting his gold that he immediately called for his dogs to chase her away. But at that very moment, at that instant, he felt a sharp, cold pain in his chest. And then he felt nothing at all, not even love of his money, because in that instant, the tiny old woman, who was really a witch, cast a spell upon the miser, changing his human heart with its human emotions into a heart of glass, a cold, hard heart that did not beat and could not feel. He began to travel from doctor to doctor, village to village, hoping to find someone somewhere who could lift the spell and return to him his human heart, and with it his human emotions. But all the doctors shook their heads. They could not cure what ailed him. At last he found the witch in her cottage in the middle of the forest. He begged her to lift the spell. She said that she could and she would, but the price for her services would be 1/2 of everything the miser owned. Well, force of habit prevented the miser from giving her that much money. And so he continued seeking someone who could help him to lift the spell and regain his human heart. He was convinced that somewhere, someday, somehow, someone would have the answer. He heard about a wise man high atop a mountain. He found the mountain, he climbed it, he found the wise man. When the wise man heard the miser's story, he said, "It's simple. All you need to do to lift the spell is to perform a single, selfless good deed." Sounds simple, but the miser had never in his life done any kind of good deed, and now with his glass heart, he could no longer tell right from wrong, good from evil. And so, of course, he failed repeatedly in his attempts to lift the spell. After years of trying and years of failing, he returned to the witch at her cottage in the middle of the forest, bringing her 1/2 of everything he owned. But she just laughed at him and said, "I'm sorry, you're too late. I can still lift the spell, but the price for my services is no longer 1/2 of everything you own. It is everything you own." By now the miser had come to realize the value of his human heart with its human emotions, and so he did return the very next day, bringing the witch everything he owned. And so, true to her word, she began to lift the spell. She began by taking a human heart, the heart of a young man, which she placed on one side of the miser's heart. Then she took another human heart, but this time the heart of a young woman, which she placed on the opposite side of the glass heart, leaving the miser's heart surrounded by 2 human hearts. Then she took an arrow from Cupid's bow. Very slowly, very carefully, she began to pass that arrow through all 3 hearts. And as it passed through the miser's heart, he felt a sharp, hot pain in his chest, but it was tears of joy that ran down his cheeks at first, because it was the first emotion he had experienced in years, until he thought of his money. When he thought of his money, the witch took out the arrow. She took out the young woman's heart. She took out the young man's heart, both of which still bore the mark of the arrow, but she left the miser as she had found him, because he had not truly learned his lesson. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, please remember, it is far better to be a poor man with a human heart than to be a rich man, a miser, if all you have is but a heart of glass. In India, they have a very different magical tradition. They have different kinds of magicians. It's part of their caste system going back for centuries. The lowest caste magicians you've probably heard of, the fakirs. They walk on burning coals, sleep on beds of nails, do these outrageous stunts to attract a crowd so their family, their friends can go through the crowd asking for bakshish. They're essentially beggars, part of the so-called untouchable caste. The middle caste magicians are the sampwala that you may have heard of. Samp is the Hindi word for serpent. Wala means man. These are the snake charmers with their baskets of cobras and their flutes. They're an itinerant tradespeople who put on what we would recognize as a performance. When they reach a new village, it's an entertainment, but it's a way of letting the villagers know that their services are available for a fixed period of time while they're in town. They're, in fact, what we would call exterminators, hired to come into the home or the place of business to rid that area of any snakes they can find. Seems to be very effective. They get paid a certain amount for every snake. They get paid more for more dangerous snakes. If they don't find any snakes, they don't get paid, but they always find at least 2. So be careful before you invite them into your home. The highest caste magicians in India are the very famous Jadoo Wala. Jadoo means magic. Wala, like before, means man. And in India, they're not regarded as entertainers or tricksters as they might be here, but regarded by some as Mahatma, great spirits, great souls, who have mastered Maya, the art of illusion. And sometimes their followers make long pilgrimages, maybe just once in a lifetime, to experience, to witness the miracles and the mysteries of the Jadawala. We're going to try to recreate one of their most famous ones. As I perform it, I should let you know that as the Jadawala perform, they generally tell a kind of story. According to the Jadawala, there comes a time in everyone's life when his or her spirit becomes as fragile as a piece of thread. When that moment arrives, the spirit, like the thread, begins to break into its many parts. There's a part of the soul that has the capacity to love, but there's a corresponding part of the soul that has the capacity to hate. The part of the soul that experiences anger, but a corresponding part of the soul that experiences peace, tranquility. There's a part of the soul that knows great sorrow, but thank goodness there's a corresponding part of the soul that knows only happiness and joy. Now, according to the Jadawala, when the time has come and the spirit has broken into its many parts, then a great change takes place, because a man or a woman that is broken in spirit cannot survive, and so the body dies. And according to the Jadawala, at the moment of death, the pieces fly from the body to the far reaches of the universe, which they circle not just once, not just twice, but finally 3 times, until at last they come to rest, suspended in space at the frontiers of the universe, where they remain, perhaps for 100 years, perhaps for 1,000 years, perhaps even for 100,000 years. But, say the Jadawala, there will come a day when the pieces will receive a call, because on that day, the great wheel of karma will have turned full circle. Watch these pieces as they receive their call. This next piece comes to us from a Japanese tradition, and they don't consider it really a piece of magic. I think it's very magical, though, so I really enjoy it. It's one of my favorites. It uses some bamboo sticks. I'll show them and talk about them for a second. In Japan, these sticks are known as nankin tamasurare. Now, Nankin is a city in China, but we know for a fact these do not come from China. There's no Chinese tradition of this. They come from China. We don't know why they're called that. Tamasurare is a kind of curtain, so as you can see, it's kind of a bamboo curtain. It's made up of 56 bamboo sticks that are tied together with 108 little pieces of string, and they're tied together in such a way that it makes the curtain or the mat very flexible, and it's kind of like an ancient transformer toy that they can be made into various shapes. In Japan, the tradition is the performers of this wear a special costume, and as they make the shapes, they sing a song, and it's kind of like charades. They make a figure, and then the song mentions the figure. But it's not a narrative. They're not telling a story. And I'm not capable of singing the song, and I didn't have the costume, but I wanted to use them to make the shapes to tell a story. So I started to play with it, and then Rosemary found some beautiful Japanese music that was transcribed for violin. Haru no Umi, The Sea of Spring by Michio Miyagi. And as I tried to work with the music with Rosemary, the story that I was working on came together in a way that I thought was worth actually trying to publish. So I got a friend in Japan. Initially, here's what my story looked like before I started working with Rosemary. Not too impressive, I think you'll agree. But as I started working with Rosemary, the story came together so much that I found a friend, a colleague in Japan that translated into Japanese. So the title I gave it was Taro-san the Fisherman. If you go to YouTube and watch the Japanese performers, in the song they mention Taro-san the Fisherman, who's a figure from Japanese folklore. I don't tell their story. I came up with my own, but I liked referring to him. And so the story came together enough that my friend Yuki Kadoya translated it into Japanese. I think you'd see it's in Japanese on one side and in English on the other, but it still seemed to be missing something. So I found a friend in Hungary, Andras Bajlok, who I told him what I wanted, and he did a super job. I think he's kind of a magician himself because I think it turned out really great. There we go, once he did it. And I'm really kind of proud of it. Now you've heard the story of the story. We'd like to tell you the story itself of Taro-san the Fisherman and the Weeping Willow Tree. When Taro-san was a little boy, he loved nothing more than to sit in the shade of a weeping willow tree on the bank of a river and fish all day long. There's something about the way the branches of the tree rustled the surface of the water attracted the fish to the surface, making them very easy for Taro-san to catch, which is probably why he loved to fish so much. So he decided at a very young age that when he grew up, he would become a professional fisherman. The years passed. The day finally arrived. He built himself a boat, and he set sail on the ocean, looking for a spot to cast out his net for the very first time. He found a spot, he cast it out, it came back empty. He found another spot, and he cast it out again. Again, it came back empty. That happened all day, the first day, the second day, the first week, the second week. He was getting very, very discouraged. He was almost ready to give up on his lifelong dream to be a professional fisherman. But before he did, he decided to make a voyage, a pilgrimage, to the sacred island of Miyajima off the eastern coast of Japan, home to some of Japan's largest and most sacred Shinto shrines. As he got close in the distance, he could see the roof of the largest shrine getting larger and larger as he got closer and closer. Closer still, in the harbor, he could see the famous Otori Gate that marks the entrance to the harbor. But before he could reach it, he had to sail his little craft underneath the long extension bridge that connects one side of the harbor to the other. He did that. He anchored his boat. He went to the shrine. But he did not enter the shrine because what he was looking for was just outside. It was a well. We would call it a wishing well because he took a piece of parchment paper and a calligraphy brush. He painted his wish to be a successful professional fisherman on the paper, and then he dropped it into the well. Hanging over the well was a bell and a log. He took the log and he struck the bell once, twice, 3 times to summon his ancestors, to let them know he had left this request for their help behind. Then he went back to the harbor, got into his boat, set sail for the mainland. But when he looked back over his shoulder at the island of Miyajima, over the shrine, he saw a large and beautiful rainbow, which he took as an omen, as a sign that his ancestors had received his plea for their help. Sure enough, when he got back to the mainland, standing on the shore, he saw an old man fishing. In fact, the old man was reeling in a fish at that very moment. Taro-san thought, this old fisherman has been sent to me by my ancestors to help me realize my dream. He introduced himself to the old man, invited him to dinner. They went into the village. They found the sign of the nearest noodle shop. And after ordering, the old fisherman said, tell me, Taro-san, what is the name of your boat? Taro-san said, it's brand new. I've only just built it. It doesn't have a name yet. There's your problem, Taro-san, said the old fisherman. A boat without a name will never catch any fish, because what do the fish see when they look up through the water? They see a fishing boat. That frightens them away. They don't want to get caught. If you give it a name, it will transform what they see. If you give it a really good name, it will attract the fish to the surface, making them easy for you to catch. Instantly, Taro-san thought he had the perfect name for his boat. As soon as they finished dinner, he went to the harbor, he went to his boat, he took his calligraphy brush and he painted the 3 Chinese characters, the kanji, for the name that he had decided upon. Without even waiting for it to dry, just after midnight, he set sail in the ocean, headed to the east. A few hours later, when he looked to the horizon to the east, he saw the sun rising in a clear blue sky, and he thought, this is another omen, a sign that this would be the perfect place for me to cast out my net for the very first time in my newly named boat. That's exactly what he did. And this time, unlike the many times before where his net had always come back empty, this time he found that it had in it the largest fish that he had ever seen. That turned out not to be a coincidence. It happened each and every time he cast out his net all day long. He was actually a little bit worried he'd have trouble sailing his little craft home into the port. It was so heavy in the water. But as he did safely sail at home, he hung 2 special flags from the bow of his boat. One flag to honor his ancestors for sending him the old fisherman, the other one to honor the old fisherman who had given him the secret of giving his boat a special name. Now, I haven't told you the name he gave it, but maybe you can guess from the story. Do you remember how when he was a boy, he would sit in the shade of the weeping willow tree and it would attract the fish to the surface? That's what he named his boat. So that now when the fish looked up through the water, what they saw didn't frighten them away. It attracted them to the surface, made them easy for him to catch, made him a successful fisherman for the rest of his long career, because to them, it now looked just like a weeping willow tree.
We extend our heartfelt gratitude for funding from the National Endowment for the Arts, National Endowment for the Humanities, Western States Arts Federation, Utah Division of Arts and Museums, Utah Legislature, Utah Humanities, City of Murray, Zoo Arts and Parks of Salt Lake County, ZAP, Salt Lake City Arts Council, and individuals like you. We sincerely appreciate the collaboration with the Salt Lake City Library System, Glendale Community Center, and neighboring schools, as well as the Summit Vista Senior Living. We also have several feed-in festivals. Special thanks to our American Sign Language interpreters, videographers, and volunteers. We celebrate the talents of our story artists, youth and adult tellers. Most of all, we appreciate you. Remember, I have a story, you have a story. We all have stories.